The Words of Failed People. Part 5. The Final Truth. 3 years had passed since Daniel first walked into Mr. Harrison's bookstore. 3 years since he received the notebook. 3 years since he began questioning the voices that had shaped his thinking. The young man who once doubted himself had changed. Not because life became easier. Not because obstacles disappeared. Not because success arrived overnight. He had changed because he learned to think differently. He learned to separate truth from fear. Wisdom from excuses. Guidance from negativity. Daniel's business was now successful. Not famous. Not enormous. But successful enough to provide freedom. Successful enough to create opportunities. Successful enough to prove that impossible things sometimes become possible. Many people now admired his journey. Many praised his determination. Many congratulated his achievements. Yet Daniel noticed something strange. Some of those same people had once told him to quit. Some of the loudest critics had become supporters. Some of the biggest doubters had become believers. The change fascinated him. One afternoon Daniel attended a community event where local entrepreneurs shared their experiences. Hundreds of people filled the hall. When Daniel's turn came to speak, he walked onto the stage. For a moment he looked at the audience. Young faces, old faces, hopeful faces, fearful faces, dreamers, doubters, people standing exactly where he once stood. Daniel began speaking. When I started my journey, I thought failure was my biggest enemy. The audience listened carefully, but I was wrong. The room became silent. My biggest enemy was believing the opinions of people who had already given up. Several people nodded. Daniel continued. Many people will tell you what cannot be done. He paused. Most of them have never tried. The audience laughed softly. Many people will explain why your dream is unrealistic. Another pause. Often because they abandoned their own. The room grew quiet again. The truth was uncomfortable, but it was real. After the speech ended, many people approached him. One young man asked, "How do I know whose advice to follow?" Daniel smiled. The question reminded him of himself years ago. He answered carefully, "Listen to people who are doing what you want to do." The young man nodded. Daniel continued, "If you want to build a business, learn from builders. If you want to write, learn from writers. If you want to succeed, learn from people who keep moving forward." Then he added, "But be careful." "Why?" the young man asked. "Because some people confuse experience with surrender." The young man looked thoughtful. Daniel smiled. Years earlier he would not have understood those words. Now he did. That evening Daniel walked through the city alone. The streets were busy. The same streets he had walked during his lowest moments. The same streets he had walked when fear controlled his life. Everything looked familiar, yet everything felt different. Eventually he arrived at the bookstore. The small bell above the door rang softly. Mr. Harrison looked up and smiled. "I was expecting you." Daniel laughed. "How?" The old man shrugged. "Big days bring people back to important places." They sat together near the window. The bookstore felt peaceful, almost timeless. Daniel looked around. Thousands of books, thousands of stories, thousands of lessons. Yet one lesson mattered more than all the others. "Do you remember the first thing you taught me?" Daniel asked. Mr. Harrison smiled. "Probably not. You told me the most dangerous advice comes from people who surrendered." The old man nodded. "I still believe that." "So do I." For several moments neither spoke. Then Mr. Harrison asked a question. "What was the most important lesson?" Daniel thought carefully. Years of experience flashed through his mind. Failures, victories, disappointments, breakthroughs. Every lesson led to a single truth. Finally he answered, "The words of failed people are not dangerous because they're negative." Mr. Harrison listened. "They're dangerous because they sound reasonable." The old man smiled. "Exactly." Daniel continued. "If someone says a dream is impossible, it sounds logical. If someone says success is unlikely, it sounds practical. If someone says not to take risks, it sounds wise." He paused. "But sometimes the safest advice creates the biggest regrets." The bookstore became silent. Outside, evening lights illuminated the city. People hurried home. Cars moved through busy streets. Life continued. Mr. Harrison stood and walked toward a shelf. He returned carrying the original notebook. The same notebook that had changed Daniel's life. He placed it on the table. "I think this belongs to you now," he said. Daniel stared at it. For a moment he couldn't speak. "This notebook changed everything." Mr. Harrison smiled. "No." Daniel looked confused. "What do you mean?" The old man pointed toward Daniel. "You changed everything." Daniel felt emotion rise inside him. The notebook contained wisdom. The notebook contained lessons. The notebook contained truth. But none of it would have mattered if he had refused to act. Mr. Harrison continued, knowledge only matters when it becomes action. Daniel nodded slowly. He understood now. As the evening grew darker, Daniel opened the notebook one final time. On the very last page he found a sentence he had never seen before. Perhaps he had missed it. Perhaps it had always been waiting for the right moment. The sentence read, "The people who change the world are not the ones who never fail. They are the ones who refuse to let failure decide who they become." Daniel stared at the words. A smile slowly appeared on his face. For years he had feared failure. Now he understood. Failure was never the end. Surrender was. Mistakes were not the enemy. Quitting was. Doubt was not the problem. Believing doubt was. As he closed the notebook, he looked through the bookstore window. The city stretched endlessly before him. Filled with dreams. Filled with opportunities. Filled with people. Some would try. Some would quit. Some would succeed. Some would surrender. And then Daniel finally understood the greatest truth of all. Failed people do not become failures because they fail. They become failures because they stop trying. The difference between success and failure is often smaller than people imagine. One more attempt. One more lesson. One more day. One more step forward. Daniel stood up and shook Mr. Harrison's hand. "Thank you." The old man smiled. "For what?" Daniel looked at the notebook. Then toward the future. Then back at the man who had changed his perspective forever. "For teaching me which voices deserve to be heard." Outside, the night air felt fresh. The city lights shone brightly. Daniel walked forward, not because he knew exactly what would happen next, but because he no longer needed certainty to continue. He had something far more valuable. Belief. And sometimes belief is enough to change an entire life. The end. Glowing star.